this video, I will talk about balancing work and play, or what I like to call delayed and immediate gratification. If you're an impulsive pleasure seeker or a driven workaholic, I hope to help you get on a healthier path. Hello, my name is Michael Dewan-Herrick. I'm a psychotherapist and a life coach with over 40 years of experience, and over time I've noticed that people can make their lives miserable, I have myself at times, by getting immediate and delayed gratification or work and play out of balance. So let's get started. In order to understand immediate and delayed gratification, I think it's important to reflect on two even more fundamental aspects of our lives, and that is pleasure and responsibility. Immediate gratification is mostly about pleasure. Delayed gratification is about fulfilling responsibilities. Our relationship to pleasure and to responsibility will say a lot about how we approach our gratification, whether it's immediate or delayed. But how does this pattern get established? Where in our life do we come to the point where we have this relationship? In our early childhood, we're naturally endowed with a kind of exuberance. We want to explore the world. We want to experience all the pleasures the world has to offer. We want to test our skills, master new things, and it's all fun. And we want an audience as well. We want to show people what we can do. Hey, mommy, look, no hands. We want that kind of recognition. What we need during that period is a safe and stimulating environment, and we need the encouragement and the support to explore it. We need to explore and express this natural exuberance and take pleasure in the world around us. If we get this affirms our basic life force energy and gives us the message that it's good and it's valuable. A lot more could be said about the details of this first stage in our lives, but for the sake of time, I want to move on to the second stage. What's next? At some point, we need to start to learn some responsibilities. We need to have some gentle but firm limits. We need some expectations. We have to learn how to keep ourselves safe and not have a negative impact on other people. So we need to delay some of our impulses. We have to learn to master our impulses for the sake of being socialized. Parents' role in this, whether it's the first stage or the second stage, is crucial. In the first stage, it's to provide the environment and the stimulation and the recognition and the affirmation. In the next stage, it's to begin to teach how to behave properly, and how to master one's impulses for the sake of one's own well-being and the sake of those around. We have to be prepared eventually for a mature adult life, so not all things will be permissible. Some things must be done, even if they're not fun. And we have to put away our toys. We have to go to school. We have to go to the doctor. There are things that we have to do when we're little that we don't like to do. But if we're gently but firmly encouraged in these things, we begin to learn about responsibility. And in that, we learn to master our impulses and experience delayed gratification. How our parents or caregivers handle these two stages of our early development will have a big impact on our relationship to immediate and delayed gratification, because it will instill in us a felt sense and belief about pleasure and about responsibility. If for any reason we're not provided with a stimulating and safe environment in that first stage, and instead we're met with reprimands and punishments for expressing our exuberant enthusiasm for life, then that life force energy will be wounded, and eventually we'll start to shut it down and turn it off. However, in the second stage, if we're not met with any limitations or expectations, then we won't learn to master our impulses. We won't learn to delay gratifications. We won't begin to become more responsible for ourselves and our impact on others. Something that I've seen happen, and it's tragic really, that when the first phase is not validated and responsibilities and obligations are enforced early on, and delayed gratification is the thing, and one's behavior and progress and performance are monitored with rewards and punishments, and no time is made for play, what can happen is that gets shut down, and the seeking for love and validation becomes the thing, and one can then enter into life with a great sense of doing all good things so that one's performance will be positively measured and validated, and it doesn't even matter, or it's missed, whether or not the things being done are for a future goal that's desirable or whether there's any pleasure in doing them, because it's all about the validation and getting the love that didn't seem to be there in the beginning. There's another approach to that, though, that I've seen. Not everybody will go down that route. Some will rebel. Some of us rebel. When that first stage is shut down and we're handed all of these responsibilities, it can almost seem like death. It can seem like life is being refused, and so something deep in us rejects that and will rebel, and maybe then go on a kind of an impulsive, risk-taking pleasure trip to rebel against all of this responsibility. Both of these paths don't have good outcomes. They both end in unfortunate places. So that's one of the ways we can get set up for our relationship as an adult to pleasure and responsibility. It's the shutting down of the first phase. But if in the second phase, either due to neglect or bad parenting, limits and expectations and discipline are not brought to a child, then the child does not learn impulse control, begins to feel entitled. There can be an ignorance of the consequences of one's behavior and a well-worn path of immediate gratification. In this case, it's not an angry rebellion, it's just the internalized sense that all of one's desires are good and should be accommodated and provided for and fulfilled. This is a different path, a different set of dynamics than a person who's rebelling against discipline, but it leads to a similar place. When we neglect responsibilities, our lives tend to fall apart, if not immediately, eventually. Depends on how much responsibility we're not willing to take on. I invite you to take a moment, you might even turn off this video for a moment and just reflect on this. How were those two phases of your childhood handled? Were you provided with a safe and stimulating environment and encouraged in your exuberance early in life? Or was that shut down? Were you taught responsibility? Were there limits and expectations that you had to lean into in order to develop? If you spend some time thinking about this, reflecting on your experience, you'll have some clue about how you are today in relationship to pleasure and responsibility, or work and play, or delayed and immediate gratification. I think it's important to acknowledge that along with the parenting that we receive, we're born into a culture, and the culture is the context for our family and our family's values and practices. So there may be a bigger world around our family that's also driving our experiences of these things early on. As well, it should be acknowledged that we come into life with a genetic predisposition. I don't know how it works, but genes play a role in everything. And I think we come in with a predisposition for pursuing pleasure or for being conscientious and delaying our gratification. And the environment that we're born into can either mediate it, if our genes are a little pushing us too far in one direction, or they can support us in developing a balance. Well, I hope that it's clear that I'm making a case for the value and the importance of being able to immediately experience pleasure and satisfaction and gratification in our lives. When it's out of balance, when we are seeking that too much, a very common result of that is to develop an addiction. Whether it's alcohol and drugs, or pornography and sex addiction, or gambling, or cruising the internet, or any number of addictions, when we are pursuing that frequently and neglecting our responsibilities and neglecting our lives in other ways, there are consequences. When we begin to feel shame about our addiction and the impact that it's had on our lives, that's just more pain on the pile. And guess what? If we can't tolerate it, then we need some recourse. And guess what? More addiction. Another addiction that often doesn't look like an addiction, it's hard to spot, is workaholism. And that's when we're trying to stay a step or two ahead of our pain. If we're busy and constantly moving around and accomplishing things, we may be able to avoid all kinds of trouble that we'd experience if we were still for a moment and just let ourselves be. On the surface, it can look like a conscientious life of delayed gratification, and it may be that future benefits are even accruing from all of the work that we do when we're working. But there's an immediate gratification going on as well, and that's the numbness and the oblivion and the avoidance of things that we'd rather not deal with if we could just stay busy. If we were robots, this might be a good thing. We could go on and on and on and accomplish all kinds of things, and it wouldn't be a problem. But we're not robots, and we wear out. We have a limit emotionally, psychologically, and particularly physically. And for the workaholic who can't take a break, sometimes a break will be demanded because the body develops a problem. It gets sick, it breaks down, there's an injury, and the body says enough. So in considering addictions as a form of immediate gratification or immediate pleasure, I think it's interesting to ask the question, what is pleasure for? Why do we experience pleasure? Is this just a happy accident of nature, just some bonus that came with being alive that we get to experience pleasure? Or is there some reason for it? And I'd propose that nature has endowed us with the ability to feel pleasure because it's what motivates us to do things that are important. Important for our survival, important for our reproduction as a species. It drives us to find food. It drives us to find a mate. Sex itself, one of the most pleasurable experiences that we have as human beings. Do you think nature just threw that in as a bonus so that we would have some fun when we had sex? Or do you think possibly it motivates us? That it's so enjoyable that we're driven to do it? Whether it's the pleasure of eating food or having sex, we're driven to these things. We're driven to do things that are life-affirming by the need to fulfill an appetite. We've gotten so smart, however, we've figured out how to get that pleasurable experience without doing anything particularly life-affirming or constructive. Instead of feeling good by mastering a new skill or acquiring something that's useful, we can just take a pill. Instead of making ourselves attractive to a potential mate, we can just watch pornography. Having spent some time talking about immediate gratification via addictions, I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about delayed gratification. In fact, what is gratification? What do we find gratifying? So far, I've been using the word pleasure as a kind of a placeholder for gratification, but there are things beyond pleasure or other than pleasure that can be gratifying. I do think, as I make a case for immediate gratification, to a large degree that means having enjoyable, pleasurable experiences But I want to make a case also for another kind of gratification, and that's not pleasure necessarily. It's what happens when we have goals and we have values and we have a sense of purpose and a sense of what's meaningful in our lives, and we align ourselves, we align our behavior with those things. There's a kind of gratification that we can get. And we can get that immediately while we're doing that, whatever that means. However we've disciplined ourselves to align with our values, we can feel good about that. We can feel consonant with our image of who we want to be in that moment. It's also building for delayed gratification in terms of it lays the foundation and it lays the stepping stones for becoming who we want to become. And I would say that delayed gratification is not simply about what we're going to get in the future, what we're going to acquire, but it's who we're going to become. We do things today that are difficult for the sake of becoming the person we'd like to be. Okay, so given all of this, what do I suggest? How do I suggest balancing and integrating work and play, immediate and delayed gratification, pleasure and responsibility? First, most importantly, recognize the value of both. Both are important. And recognize and reflect on the consequence of leaning too far in one direction or the other. There are predictable consequences that are undesirable. So that's the first step. When pursuing immediate gratification and pleasure, simply be careful not to pursue things that will have a negative consequence or impact on your health, either your physical, your psychological health, or on your relationship. Be careful about using immediate gratification to avoid problems and avoid the pain in your life. Sure, we all need a break. At some point we've worked on a problem, we've thought long enough about it, we've let ourselves feel grief or anger or whatever, and we need a break. So yeah, take a break. But just the caution is to not make the break last so long that it becomes an avoidance of getting back to the whatever challenge you need to deal with. To avoid or address addictions, I suggest, in order to get immediate gratification, see if you can do something that has some constructive element to it. You're learning something, you're gaining a skill, you're improving the health of your body. There's lots of things that we can do to get pleasure. You can make something with your hands, play a musical instrument, do gardening, draw, paint, knit, write poetry, fix old cars, learn a foreign language, do pottery. Really, the list is endless. If you're used to the immediate, intense pleasure that can come from an addiction, and you're trying to switch over to these other, more wholesome forms of immediate gratification, it may not be at the level of intensity and provide you the full hit of what you're looking for. But if you stick to it, that will deepen. That will become more meaningful and more satisfying than the addiction. And that kind of neural network in your brain that hooks up your activities, your constructive activities, with the deliverance of the reward system in your brain for doing something, that will grow, and you'll find more satisfaction in these things if you persist at them. So that's a few tips about working with immediate gratification or play. In terms of delayed gratification, the central idea, and I can't say this enough or stress it enough, you were delaying something, right? We're putting it in the future. Something we're looking forward to, something we're willing to work hard at and maybe not have all that much fun so we can get there. My point is, choose something that you really desire. Choose something that makes sense to you, that you have a fascination with, that when you're you're involved in it, you're interested, you're fascinated, you may lose track of time. It's something that it's in your future, but it's something that you also get gratification for in the present. It may not always be pleasurable, but there's something about it that's driving you. And it's not, what you're not delaying for some future is the validation of people who have expectations for you, whether they're parents or some idea of your peers or somebody else who you think is measuring whether you're lovable or not based on what you achieve in the future. We all want validation. I'm not saying we can live without it, but don't let it drive what it is you're going for in the future. Don't make what the gratification that you're delaying be primarily about that. Built in the pleasure, built in the immediate gratification within the delay, right? So that you're getting a bit of that while you're hoping for more later. Another way to put this is see if you can find yourself not being able to keep track of what's work and what's play. See if your work feels like play sometimes. If that happens, then you're discovering what it is I'm talking about. Creating a future gratification that's built on something that's also playful today. Establishing a balance between work and play, or between delayed and immediate gratification, I don't think looks like a consistent, constant, even balance. It fluctuates over time. Sometimes we really have to apply ourselves and delay gratification and work very hard. There's something at stake. We have a circumstance that requires us to really work hard, and it's not all going to be fun. And then there are other times when we'll take an extended holiday, take a sabbatical, we'll travel around the world. Whatever we do, we take off and we just explore the pleasures of our lives. So there's that happens. I'm not advocating to keep these finely tuned to a 50-50 balance at all times. But what I would suggest is that we can notice when we need some of the other. When it's been imbalanced for a while, we can feel it. If we've been delaying gratification, working too hard, we'll start to feel exhausted, stressed, overwhelmed. We might get sick, and it's a signal. We have to notice the signals. If we've gone off on a long holiday or we've taken a great time off, at some point we may get restless, we may get bored, we may feel that we want to do something constructive. I know I took a 2-week holiday in the Bahamas and spent most of the time hanging out at the beach. And this is kind of an idyllic image of, the way life should be, right? Somewhere in the midst of the second week, I really got bored. I think it wasn't just that I didn't know how to relax. I well knew how to relax, and I had relaxed. It was that I wanted to get back to work. I wanted to do something useful. So I think we can notice that. We'll notice. You have to pay attention, and when you notice that you've gotten imbalanced, whether you've delayed gratification too long or you've pursued immediate gratification too long, when you notice that, add some of the other. Find your way back to some of the other. Something I haven't said yet about delayed gratification, but I do think it's worth reflecting on this. If we choose an intense path of delayed gratification over a very long period of time, maybe this is a result of our childhood and we've just gotten stuck in that. We may have a vision of a retirement or some future point when things are going to be better and we'll have enough money or we'll have enough security or something is going to happen, and then our lives will be enjoyable. What happens When we don't build that into our life along the way, I think, is that our brain begins to shut down. The neural connections that are about pleasure and satisfaction fizzle out a bit, and we get into this chronic state of tension, and we don't know how to enjoy ourselves. We don't know how to take pleasure anymore. I've known men particularly who worked a very long career, long life, with a hope for a retirement, and when they got to the retirement, they didn't know what to do with themselves. They didn't know how to enjoy life. What they had worked so hard for all of their lives, and it finally got there, the one thing they might be able to say is they had security, but they didn't have joy. They didn't have a sense of meaning. They didn't have a sense of pleasure in their day-to-day lives. In order to have a brain that works well enough to enjoy later life, I think we need to exercise those neural connections along the way. One of the ways we can do that is to pause routinely to feel gratitude. Not just in an abstract sense, not just in a technical sense, but in a felt sense. Anything that we enjoy, appreciate, and are grateful for, we can acknowledge and take a moment. Close your eyes if you need to get in touch with that feeling. It's a pleasurable feeling. There's something good. That early, exuberant life force energy of childhood, there's something in there, a feeling of gratitude touches that, it wakes that up. I'm afraid what happens if we don't learn how to do that, if we don't keep that part of ourselves alive, we just keep zipping past everything we do. We don't pause to celebrate and appreciate our accomplishments. We just set our sights on the next thing that's in the future, and we just keep moving that way towards something that we are going to guarantee ourselves we'll never actually enjoy. Sure, when we accomplish things, we can't feel satisfied to rest on our laurels. That's not the end of the line. Sure, there's going to be the next thing, but that doesn't mean we can't pause and celebrate and appreciate and have gratitude to ourselves for what we've accomplished and what we've gained in our lives. I think that's important. Another thing that might be important to you is to recognize it's not just our own balance and integration of work and play or delayed and immediate gratification that we can apply ourselves to, but we're often in relationship with other people who don't have a good balanced and integrated relationship to work and play themselves. And it's affecting their well-being, and it may have an impact on our relationship with them as well. For instance, if you have a partner or a spouse or a good friend who is a pleasure seeker, it's mostly about immediate gratification and having fun. This person could be a lot of fun. It may be what makes them attractive. But if they don't also have some sense of responsibility, eventually things are going to start to fall apart for them. And if you're close to them, if you're in a relationship or married, that's going to cause problems. And you may feel guilty that you need to rescue them. They may help to inflame feelings of guilt and responsibility from you and make requests or try to elicit that you come and rescue them from whatever consequence they've managed to bring about in their lives. When we love someone, naturally we don't want to see them suffer. Naturally we have an impulse to do what we can to minimize their suffering. But past a point, helping somebody who hasn't taken responsibility for themselves turns into enabling, and helping that person turns out doesn't help. Instead of providing whatever it is or doing whatever it is that they need done, and instead of just walking away, what you can do is encourage and support them in doing what it is they need to do for their own well-being. On the other hand, if you happen to be with a workaholic, somebody who doesn't make time for fun or even time for you and fun and quality time, you can point this out. If you have concern about their well-being, if you have concern about the impact of that pattern of behavior on your relationship, you can share that and perhaps encourage that you have a date night, or that you take a holiday, or that this person consider having some boundaries, time boundaries around their work, so that there can be time to spend on a regular basis to invest in the relationship, and or that the person take for just me time, chill time for themselves, for their own well-being. You can encourage that. What I will say, though, is that whether it's immediate gratification or delayed gratification, which is out of balance, if it's severe and it's going on a while, it's not something that generally gets fixed with a simple conversation. It's something that requires patience and persistence and effort and time. And working that out with them can be well worthwhile for their well-being and for the sake of the relationship. At some point, it may be necessary to evaluate for yourself whether the relationship is worth it, whether things are so out of balance, or whether the correction is taking too long for you. It may be that you have needs that are becoming non-negotiable, and you have to think about that. I can't, and I don't think anybody can tell you what you should decide to do in that case. Stay with a person, leave a person. What I will suggest is that if it's an important relationship that you've had for a while, to think about it, reflect, don't act impulsively, make sure that you feel good and right about whatever decision you make, whether it's staying with somebody who's been difficult or leaving somebody who's been difficult in these ways. But I wanted to acknowledge that work and play is about ourselves, but because we're in relationship and everybody has a relationship to work and play, your significant other may present issues for you that you'll also have to deal with. If you have struggled with balancing work and play, or pleasure and responsibility, or immediate and delayed gratification in your life, or you're with somebody who struggles with that, I hope that what I've said has provided some new ways for you to think about it, and hopefully a way forward, a way to relate to it and find a way to balance and to integrate them in your life. May you enjoy your life, and may you build toward a future that you truly desire. If you like this video, give it a like, subscribe, share it with a friend, leave me comments, and I will leave links for a couple of the research papers that help to inform this video in the notes below, in case you'd like to look into that yourself. But for now, that's all, and take care, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.